Howdy, partners! Today we're diving into the wild and wacky world of the Wild West. Saddle up and get ready for some surprising facts you probably never knew. We're talking about the real deal here, folks. Not just the stuff you see in those old-timey movies. You know, the ones with the squeaky saloon doors and tumbleweeds rolling down the street. Yeah, we're going way past that. We're about to uncover the strange, the surprising, and maybe even the slightly spooky side of the Wild West. So hold on to your hats and let's get started. Alright, let's talk cowboys. Now I know what you're thinking, Stetson hats, trusty steeds, shootouts at high noon. Well, hold your horses, buckaroo, because the reality was a little less glamorous and a lot more, well, smelly. See, those Hollywood cowboys make it look like a rootin' tootin' good time, but real cowboy life was tough. We're talking long hours, low pay, and the constant threat of, getting trampled by cattle. Plus those fancy leather chaps, yeah, more like a breeding ground for all sorts of creepy crawlies. Not exactly the stuff of legends, right? Now, when you picture the Wild West, you probably imagine a bunch of grizzled dudes with more facial hair than a barbershop floor. And while there were plenty of those, let's not forget the real trailblazers, the women of the Wild West. These weren't your delicate wallflowers, oh no. We're talking about fearless pioneers, savvy businesswomen, and yes, even some notorious outlaws. These women weren't afraid to get their hands dirty, whether it was running a saloon, panning for gold, or, robbing a train or two. They were tough, independent, and they made their mark on history, one dusty boot print at a time. Gold! The word alone was enough to send folks flocking west like a swarm of, bees to honey, I guess. The gold rush was like a giant magnet, pulling in dreamers, schemers, and everyone in between. But let me tell you, for every lucky prospector who struck it rich, there were hundreds more who ended up with nothing but blisters, empty pockets, and a serious case of gold fever. It was a time of boom and bust where fortunes were made and lost overnight. And you know what they say about gold, right? It makes people do some crazy things. Chapter 4: Native American Tribes, a story of resilience and resistance. Now, before the waves of settlers came rushing in, the West was already home to a diverse tapestry of Native American tribes. These were folks who had lived in harmony with the land for centuries. But as more and more settlers arrived, hungry for land and resources, things got complicated. It's a story that's often glossed over in those romanticized Wild West tales, but it's a vital part of history. We're talking about broken treaties, forced removals, and outright conflict. It's a dark chapter, but it's important to remember and learn from. Chapter 5: Outlaws and Lawmen. A game of cat and mouse in a Stetson. The Wild West was practically a breeding ground for legends, and none more so than the outlaws and lawmen who went toe-to-toe under the scorching desert sun. This era, spanning from the late 1800s to the early 1900s, was a time of lawlessness and opportunity where the line between hero and villain was often blurred. The vast, untamed landscapes provided the perfect backdrop for tales of daring heists, relentless pursuits, and dramatic showdowns. On one side, you had your legendary outlaws Jesse James, Billy the Kid, Butch Cassidy, and the Sundance Kid. These men became infamous for their audacious crimes and their ability to evade capture. They were seen by some as folk heroes, standing up against the establishment and living by their own rules. Their stories were passed down through generations, becoming larger than life with each retelling. These were the Robin Hoods of the West, robbing banks, trains, and generally giving those fancy-pants lawmen a run for their money. Their exploits were not just about the loot, they were acts of defiance against a system that many felt was unjust. The thrill of the chase, the cunning escapes, and the sheer audacity of their crimes captivated the public's imagination. Speaking of which, on the other side of the badge you had Wyatt Earp, Wild Bill Hickok, and Bass Reeves, who were basically the superhero lawmen of their time. These men were tasked with maintaining order in a lawless land, a job that required not just bravery, but also a keen sense of justice and an unyielding determination. They were the ones who stood between chaos and order, often putting their lives on the line to bring criminals to justice. Their reputations were built on their ability to outthink and outgun the outlaws, and their stories became the stuff of legend. From the dusty streets of Dodge City to the rugged trails of Indian Territory, these lawmen were relentless in their pursuit of justice. They were tasked with bringing those outlaws to justice, which, in the Wild West, often meant a shootout at high noon. These dramatic confrontations were not just about enforcing the law, They were about proving who was the fastest, the smartest, and the most determined. The stakes were high, and the outcomes were often deadly. But these showdowns became iconic moments in the history of the Wild West, symbolizing the eternal struggle between good and evil. Chapter 6. The Pony Express Ridin' Shotgun for the Mail. Now, before smartphones and emails, folks had to rely on something a little more analog. Enter the Pony Express, a network of horseback riders who braved treacherous trails, scorching heat, and the occasional grumpy buffalo to deliver mail from Missouri all the way to California. These were some tough riders, let me tell you. They changed horses every 10 to 15 miles, rode day and night, and faced down all sorts of dangers. Sure, it only lasted about 18 months, but in that short time the Pony Express became a symbol of American grit and determination. Alright, let's talk about healthcare in the Wild West. And by healthcare I mean a combination of questionable remedies, sheer willpower, and a whole lot of luck. See, back then, doctors were few and far between. If you got sick or injured, well, you were pretty much on your own. We're talking about using leeches, performing amputations with a rusty saw, and hoping for the best. It wasn't pretty, folks, but hey, at least they had plenty of whiskey, right? Chapter 8. Ghost Towns, Booms, Busts, and Eerie Echoes. The Wild West was like a game of musical chairs, with towns popping up and disappearing faster than you can say gold rush. These towns were often built overnight, spurred by the promise of gold, silver, or other precious resources. People flocked to these areas hoping to strike it rich and build a new life. And when the music stopped, sometimes all that was left were these eerie ghost towns. The once bustling streets would fall silent, and the buildings that were once filled with life and laughter would stand empty, slowly decaying over time. These abandoned settlements are like snapshots frozen in time, with empty saloons, dusty general stores, and the lingering feeling that someone's watching you. Walking through these towns, you can almost hear the echoes of the past, the clinking of glasses in the saloon, the chatter of people in the streets, and the creak of wooden floors in the general store. What happened to these towns? Why did they fall into such disrepair and abandonment? Well, sometimes the gold ran dry, the railroad moved on, or the resources that had once drawn people to the area were depleted. The economic lifeblood of the town would vanish, leaving the residents with no choice but to move on in search of new opportunities. Or maybe the folks just decided to pack up and find their fortune elsewhere. The promise of a better life in a new town or city would lure them away, leaving behind their homes and businesses to be reclaimed by nature. Whatever the reason, these ghost towns are a haunting reminder of the boom and bust nature of the Wild West. They stand as silent witnesses to a bygone era, telling the stories of dreams pursued and abandoned, of fortunes made and lost, and of the relentless march of time that spares no one. Outro so long, partner. Thanks for joining us on this wild ride through history. If you enjoyed these strange facts about the Wild West, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more fascinating content. Until next time, happy trails.